November 12, 1943. A cramped office in the Bendler block, Berlin. The building at 76 Tirpitzufer housed the nerve centre of German army intelligence operations, where two of the Wehrmacht's most accomplished analysts were about to confront a truth that would shatter every assumption the German High Command held about their enemy. Colonel Reinhard Gehlen, head of Foreign Armies East, sat across from his counterpart, Colonel Alexis von Roener, who led Foreign Armies West. Both men had reached their positions through demonstrated analytical brilliance and meticulous attention to detail. Both had spent years tracking enemy capabilities with professional precision, and both were now staring at documents that represented something far more devastating than any battlefield defeat. Between them lay a stack of papers that appeared unremarkable, standard American military logistics reports captured during recent operations in Italy. The forms were bureaucratic, mundane even, filled with columns of numbers recording supplies delivered, consumed, and requisitioned. Nothing about their appearance suggested they contained information that would prove the mathematical impossibility of German victory. Yet the numbers they contained represented an industrial reality so overwhelming that both officers had spent the previous week cross-referencing sources, checking calculations, and searching desperately for errors that would make the figures less apocalyptic. Von Roener's hands trembled slightly as he pushed the top document across the desk. It was a simple supply requisition form from the American Fifth Army in Italy, listing monthly delivery targets for a single American corps operating in the Italian theatre. The form was stamped, dated, signed by multiple logistics officers, clearly authentic. Gehlen studied the figures in silence, his face growing pale as he absorbed their implications. The Americans were delivering more ammunition to one corps in 1 month than the entire Wehrmacht received on the Eastern Front during the same period. He looked up at von Roener, searching his colleague's face for some indication this was error or deception. Von Roener's expression offered no comfort. He had already worked through the same calculations, reached the same conclusions, and spent 3 sleepless nights hoping he was wrong. "This cannot be accurate," Gehlen said quietly, though his tone carried no conviction. He was not stating a belief, but expressing a wish, the desperate hope that reality might somehow be less terrible than the evidence suggested. Von Roener pulled another document from the stack. "I thought the same. This is a fuel delivery report for the same corps, covering a single month of operations. They received 3.2 million gallons of gasoline and 800,000 gallons of diesel." He paused, letting the numbers settle. "I compared this to our own fuel allocations. Army Group Centre, with 3 full armies and over 500,000 men, receives less fuel in a month than this one American corps." The two men had spent the past week engaged in exactly this kind of comparison, cross-referencing captured American documents with German logistics reports, POW interrogations with aerial reconnaissance data, agent reports from neutral countries with analysis of captured equipment. Every source confirmed the same impossible truth. America was not just outproducing Germany, they were operating on a scale that defied comprehension, on a level that made German industrial capacity look medieval by comparison. The numbers told a story that no amount of courage, tactical brilliance, or ideological fervour could overcome. Germany was fighting against arithmetic itself, and arithmetic always wins. The journey to this moment of terrible clarity had begun months earlier, but its roots stretched back years into fundamental miscalculations about American industrial potential. The German intelligence services had tracked Allied industrial capacity since before the war, compiling reports on factory locations, production capabilities, and resource availability. But they had consistently, catastrophically, underestimated what America could achieve when fully mobilized. This was not mere incompetence. The assumptions built into German strategic thinking, shaped by Nazi racial ideology and Germany's own industrial experience, made American industrial power seem impossible, even fantastical. Germany's own wartime experience coloured everything they believed about industrial production. By 1943, the Reich had mobilized every available resource, stripped occupied territories of raw materials and machinery, implemented slave labor on a massive scale, and pushed its industrial capacity to what seemed like absolute limits. German factories operated around the clock. Workers put in extended shifts. Production of weapons and ammunition had increased dramatically from pre-war levels. Germany was producing tanks, aircraft and artillery at rates that would have seemed unthinkable in 1939. Yet despite this total mobilization, despite conquering most of Europe and exploiting its resources, despite the desperate intensification of production under Albert Speer's direction, Germany was losing the material war. The fundamental German miscalculation began before the first shot was fired. In May 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt stood before Congress and announced that America would produce 50,000 aircraft annually as part of a massive rearmament program. Over the following months, he expanded this vision: 185,000 aircraft, 120,000 tanks, 55,000 anti-aircraft guns, and 18 million tons of merchant shipping within 2 years. These figures were transmitted to Berlin through multiple intelligence channels. When presented to Hitler and his advisors, the German leadership's response was dismissive, even contemptuous. The numbers were obviously American propaganda, they concluded, designed to intimidate Germany and boost Allied morale. The assessment seemed entirely reasonable based on available data. In 1939, American military aircraft production totaled fewer than 3,000 planes annually. The US Army ranked 18th in the world in size, smaller than Portugal's. American tanks were obsolete designs, few in number. The US Navy, while substantial, was divided between two oceans and focused on coastal defense rather than power projection. How could a nation with such limited military capacity suddenly increase production 60-fold in just 2 years? It violated every principle of industrial mobilization that German experience had established. Building factories took years. Training workers required months. Developing production techniques demanded extensive trial and error. Roosevelt's proclamation seemed like the fantasy of a desperate politician rather than achievable reality. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe and one of Hitler's closest advisors, reportedly laughed when he heard Roosevelt's announcement. While this account comes from secondary sources rather than contemporary German documents, multiple historians cite Göring stating that Americans could only make refrigerators and razor blades and could never produce the military equipment necessary to defeat Germany. Whether the exact quote is accurate, the sentiment it captured was certainly real. German leadership genuinely believed American industrial capacity was unsuited for military production. This assessment seemed supported by observable facts. America excelled at producing consumer goods, automobiles, household appliances. But military equipment required different expertise, different organizational structures, different engineering approaches. German industry had been preparing for war since 1933. How could American consumer goods manufacturers possibly match German military industrial capacity? The Germans failed to understand something fundamental about American industrial potential that would prove decisive. The Great Depression had idled massive amounts of industrial infrastructure across the United States. Factories sat empty or underutilized. Millions of skilled workers remained unemployed or underemployed. Machine tools that could produce components for automobiles, tractors, or refrigerators sat idle or operated at reduced capacity. What looked like economic weakness was actually enormous reserve capacity waiting to be activated. When Roosevelt called for military mobilization, he was not asking American industry to build entirely new capability from nothing. He was asking them to convert existing factories, rehire laid-off workers, and redirect machinery that was already built, installed, and proven. The infrastructure for industrial mobilization already existed, requiring only redirection rather than creation. Germany, by contrast, had no such reserve. By 1940, German industry was already operating at near capacity. The Nazi regime had been rearming since 1933, steadily expanding military production year after year. There was little idle capacity to activate, few unemployed skilled workers to rehire, minimal machinery sitting unused. German expansion could only come through building new factories from scratch, conquering territories with existing industrial capacity, or exploiting slave labour. Each of these approaches took years to implement and faced inherent limitations. The fundamental difference in starting positions, American unused capacity versus German full utilization, meant that America could scale up production far faster than Germany could match, and on a far larger base. The German intelligence services, particularly Foreign Armies West under Colonel von Roene, had the institutional responsibility for tracking Allied capabilities. Von Roene came from aristocratic Prussian military lineage. His family had served Germany for generations. He embodied the professional Prussian officer class, methodical, detail-oriented, committed to objective analysis. His organization collected information from multiple sources, including Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, signals intelligence from radio intercepts, agent networks operating in neutral countries, systematic interrogation of captured prisoners, and documents captured during military operations. Throughout 1941 and 1942, as America entered the war and began mobilizing, the intelligence picture reaching Berlin remained incomplete and confusing. Reports of American production capacity varied wildly depending on source and method. Some indicated massive increases in output, factories running multiple shifts, tens of thousands of aircraft rolling off assembly lines. Other reports suggested continued economic struggles, labor disputes, inefficient production methods, equipment of inferior quality. The German High Command chose to believe the more comforting assessments, the ones that aligned with their preconceptions about American weakness. This selective acceptance of intelligence was not unique to the Germans. All military organizations tend to favor information confirming existing beliefs over data challenging core assumptions. But in Germany's case, the cost of this cognitive bias would prove catastrophic. After all, Germany was winning in 1941 and early 1942. The Wehrmacht had conquered Poland in weeks, France in 6 weeks, Yugoslavia in 11 days. German forces occupied Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, most of France, significant portions of the Soviet Union. The Luftwaffe had proven itself the most formidable air force in the world. German tanks and tactical methods were clearly superior to those of any opponent. German U-boats were sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced, or so Berlin believed. Why should German leadership fear a nation that had not fought a major war since 1918, whose army was tiny, whose tanks were obsolete, whose industrial capacity was oriented toward consumer goods rather than military hardware? This comfortable certainty began developing cracks in North Africa. When American forces landed in Operation Torch on November 8, 1942, German commanders expected to face inexperienced troops with inferior equipment who could be quickly defeated and pushed back into the sea. What they encountered was something else entirely. The Americans were indeed inexperienced. That assessment proved accurate. Early engagements, particularly the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, resulted in humiliating American defeats. German forces drove American units back over 50 miles, killed over 1,000 American soldiers, captured substantial numbers of prisoners, and seized significant quantities of equipment. German tactical superiority was demonstrated conclusively. But something about the American forces troubled experienced German commanders. The sheer quantity of their equipment was staggering and unprecedented. American units that suffered heavy losses in battle were fully re-equipped within days, sometimes within hours. Vehicles, weapons, ammunition, supplies flowed in seemingly endless streams. German units that won tactical victories found themselves unable to exploit them because American logistics simply absorbed the losses and continued operations without pause. Captured American supply dumps contained more material than entire German army groups possessed. American artillery fired ammunition at rates German forces could only dream of achieving. American infantry units were motorized to a degree the Wehrmacht had never achieved, even with its elite formations. General Erwin Rommel, commanding Axis forces in North Africa from February 1941 until his recall to Germany on March 9, 1943, began sending increasingly alarmed reports to Berlin. Each American infantry division, he noted, possessed more trucks than an entire German corps. American logistics units operated vehicle fleets larger than those available to entire German armies. Supply installations captured during German advances contained food, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, medical supplies, and equipment in quantities that seemed wasteful, even obscene by German standards. Rommel, known for his tactical brilliance, understood that tactics became irrelevant when facing such massive material superiority. He urged withdrawal from North Africa entirely, arguing that Allied air and naval superiority combined with unlimited logistics made Axis defeat inevitable regardless of battlefield success. These reports were noted, filed, and largely ignored by the High Command in Berlin. Rommel was known for pessimism, for always requesting more resources, for emphasizing difficulties over opportunities. His complaints were dismissed as the usual general's grumbling, the predictable tendency of field commanders to exaggerate enemy strength and minimize their own capabilities. Hitler personally rejected Rommel's assessments, insisting that willpower and tactical superiority would overcome numerical disadvantages. The Führer's worldview could not accommodate the possibility that industrial production might matter more than ideological commitment or military skill. But the intelligence analysts could not so easily dismiss what they were seeing. Throughout 1943, as the war turned decisively against Germany on multiple fronts, the volume of concerning data increased exponentially. After the surrender of Axis forces in Tunisia on May 13, 1943, German intelligence conducted systematic interrogation of the approximately 125,000 captured German soldiers among the 250,000 to 275,000 total Axis prisoners. The debriefing teams, operating from questionnaires developed by the intelligence services, sought to understand not just tactical details of the fighting, but broader patterns of Allied, particularly American, military capability. The stories these prisoners told were remarkably consistent across rank, unit, and experience level. Every interrogated prisoner described American supply abundance that seemed wasteful by German standards. They spoke of entire meals being thrown away because soldiers did not like the taste. They described American vehicles being abandoned after minor mechanical problems because it was easier to requisition a new one than repair the old. They recounted seeing supply dumps larger than anything in the German army, containing food, ammunition, fuel, equipment in quantities that appeared unlimited. Medical supplies were available in abundance, including sulfur drugs that were increasingly scarce in Germany. Captured prisoners received better food as POWs than they had eaten as soldiers. Some accounts seemed so extreme that interrogators initially suspected exaggeration or Allied propaganda. But the consistency across hundreds of independent interrogations made dismissal impossible. Officers and enlisted men, paratroopers and infantry, tank crews and artillerymen all told the same stories of overwhelming American material superiority. More significantly, these accounts matched what German forces were experiencing on other fronts. In Sicily, captured in July and August 1943, German forces encountered similar patterns. In Italy, where Allied forces landed in September 1943, the pattern repeated. Everywhere German forces engaged Americans, they found enemies with seemingly unlimited supplies. These prisoner accounts, while concerning, could theoretically be dismissed as subjective impressions, exaggerated by defeated soldiers trying to explain their failure. But then the captured documents began arriving in Berlin in greater numbers, and these could not be dismissed. Unlike POW accounts, supply documents were clinical, bureaucratic, undeniable. They were not meant to impress or intimidate. They were simply the routine paperwork of American military logistics, the mundane forms that tracked supplies through the military distribution system. And the numbers they contained were apocalyptic for German strategic planning. One particular document proved especially illuminating, a monthly supply report from an American Army Corps operating in Italy during autumn 1943. The report, stamped and signed by multiple logistics officers, listed deliveries and consumption for the month. The Corps consisted of approximately 80,000 men, comparable in size to a German Army Corps. But the comparison ended there. The American Corps had received 3.2 million gallons of gasoline and 800,000 gallons of diesel fuel during the month. Colonel Galen compared this to fuel allocations for German forces on the Eastern Front. Army Group Center, consisting of multiple corps with several 100,000 men, received less total fuel in a month than this single American Corps. The disparity was not marginal. It was a difference of kind rather than degree. The ammunition figures in the same report were even more devastating. The American Corps had received 15,000 tons of artillery ammunition during the month. German Corps received perhaps 2,000 tons during the same period, and that was considered adequate supply. The Americans were firing shells at 7 times the German rate, and crucially, this was sustainable. This was not some special preparation for a major offensive where supplies were concentrated for a brief period. This was normal operating procedure, the routine monthly supply for regular operations. The implications were staggering. American artillery could provide fire support at rates that would exhaust German ammunition supplies in days, and they could maintain this indefinitely. The vehicle replacement figures told an equally disturbing story. During 1 month of routine operations, not major battles, just normal activity, the American Corps had received 847 trucks, 127 jeeps, 43 tanks, and 68 artillery pieces as replacements for combat losses and mechanical failures. These were not additions to unit strength. These were simply replacing losses to maintain authorized equipment levels. The German army had received fewer tanks from total national production in the previous month than this one American Corps received as routine replacements. The mathematical implications were inescapable. If America could replace losses at this rate for one corps, and they had dozens of corps deployed across multiple theatres, then their total logistics capacity exceeded German production by orders of magnitude. Colonel von Roener approached these documents with the methodical precision that had made him one of Germany's most respected intelligence officers. He was an aristocrat from a family that embodied Prussian military tradition, but he was also a professional analyst trained to evaluate evidence objectively regardless of personal preferences. The captured American documents represented hard data that could be quantified, compared, and analyzed. He began calculating systematically. If one American corps consumed supplies at this rate, and the United States had deployed dozens of such corps across the Mediterranean, Pacific, and preparing for operations in Western Europe, then the total American logistical capacity was beyond anything Germany could match or even imagine. Von Roener requested additional intelligence on American industrial production from all available sources. What came back over the following weeks was compiled from multiple independent sources. Agent reports from Switzerland and Sweden, where German intelligence maintained networks, neutral country trade statistics that could be analyzed for patterns, technical manuals captured with American equipment that listed manufacturer details and serial numbers, analysis of equipment serial numbers from captured vehicles and weapons that allowed production volume estimates, and open-source intelligence from American newspapers and magazines that published information about factory expansion and production achievements. Each source had limitations and potential for error, but when multiple independent sources confirmed the same basic picture, the conclusions became undeniable. The American tank production story proved particularly revealing and disturbing. In 1941, America had produced approximately 4,021 tanks. German intelligence had documented this figure and considered it unimpressive. Germany produced more. The German assessment seemed reasonable. America was clearly behind in military preparation, just as expected. But by 1942, American tank production had reached 26,608 units, a more than six-fold increase in a single year. German intelligence officers initially suspected these figures were propaganda or included every type of armoured vehicle regardless of combat capability. But analysis of captured equipment, POW interrogations, and agent reports confirmed the numbers. And 1943 brought even more shocking data. American tank production reached 37,198 units, the peak year of American tank production during the entire war. Germany, by contrast, had produced roughly 5,530 tanks in 1942 and approximately 11,600 in 1943. These German figures represented significant increases over pre-war production and required enormous efforts: factory expansion, extended shifts, streamlined production methods. German industry was operating at maximum sustainable capacity, and production of 11,600 tanks in a year was considered an impressive achievement. Yet the Americans were producing more than 3 tanks for every one Germany built, and the gap was widening rather than narrowing. More disturbing still, American production was accelerating while German production struggled under the weight of Allied bombing campaigns and resource shortages. Aircraft production statistics proved even more lopsided and alarming. Germany produced approximately 15,596 military aircraft in 1942, according to the US Strategic Bombing Survey's analysis of captured German records. This figure represented a significant increase from previous years, and German leadership celebrated it as proof of industrial strength and mobilization success. The Luftwaffe was being equipped with modern fighters and bombers in substantial numbers, but American production in 1942 reached 47,836 aircraft, more than 3 times German output. When German intelligence officers first encountered these figures, they assumed they were propaganda or included training aircraft, gliders, and non-combat types. But analysis proved the figures represented combat aircraft comparable to German types. In 1943, the disparity widened further. American production reached 85,898 aircraft, while German production, despite intense efforts to increase output, reached approximately 20,600 planes. The Americans were building more than 4 aircraft for every one Germany produced. In 1944, American production would reach 96,318 aircraft, while German production peaked at approximately 39,807 planes before declining under the impact of Allied bombing. By war's end, the United States would produce approximately 300,317 military aircraft total, a figure that exceeded even Roosevelt's ambitious 1940 projections. The sky belonged to the Allies not because of pilot skill or aircraft quality, though both mattered, but because American factories could build planes faster than German pilots could shoot them down, and faster than German factories could replace losses. But perhaps the most devastating comparison involved merchant shipping, because it directly addressed what German naval strategy depended upon. Germany understood that logistics in a global war depended fundamentally on maritime transportation. The Atlantic Ocean was the crucial battleground where U-boats sought to sever supply lines between America and Britain. If Germany could sink ships faster than they could be built, Allied logistics would collapse, Britain would be starved into submission, and American material superiority would be irrelevant because it could not reach the fighting fronts. The U-boat campaign was Germany's answer to American industrial capacity. Destroy the ships, and production numbers become meaningless. Germany tracked Allied shipping losses meticulously. In 1942, German U-boats achieved their greatest success, sinking 1,322 Allied ships totaling 6.3 million tons. This seemed like devastating success, the highest annual total of the war. Surely the Allies could not sustain such losses indefinitely. The Battle of the Atlantic appeared to be tilting toward Germany. U-boat commanders were celebrated as heroes, their successes prominently featured in German propaganda. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, confidently predicted that sustained sinking rates would force Allied surrender before American industrial production could become decisive. Yet despite these massive losses, Allied shipping capacity increased throughout 1942. How was this possible? The answer lay in American shipbuilding capacity that defied all German understanding of industrial production. The captured documents and intelligence reports included increasing references to Liberty ships, a standardized cargo vessel design that American shipyards were producing at extraordinary rates. Initially, German intelligence dismissed reports of Liberty ship production rates as obvious propaganda, too absurd to credit. The claims stated that American shipyards were building these 10,000-ton cargo ships in an average of 42 days from keel laying to launch. Some were reportedly built in less than 2 weeks. This was impossible according to everything German naval architects understood about shipbuilding. Ship construction was a slow, methodical process taking months or years. Each vessel was essentially custom-built, with thousands of parts fabricated and assembled by skilled craftsmen. The welding alone for a 10,000-ton ship would take many weeks. Claims of construction times under 6 weeks violated every known principle of ship construction. Yet prisoners of war consistently reported seeing dozens of Liberty ships in American ports. Captured documents referenced Liberty ship serial numbers in the thousands. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights of American coastal areas, limited though they were, photographed shipyards with multiple similar-looking vessels in various stages of construction. Agent reports from neutral countries confirmed massive American shipbuilding expansion. Von Roener requested a technical assessment from German naval intelligence, asking experts to evaluate whether the reported Liberty ship production rates were theoretically possible. The response confirmed the impossible. American shipyards were indeed producing Liberty ships at the reported rates using revolutionary construction methods. Instead of traditional riveting, Americans employed welding throughout, which was faster but required different skills. Instead of building ships sequentially from keel up, they prefabricated entire sections in parallel. Bow sections, stern sections, deck sections, engine rooms, all built simultaneously in different areas of the shipyard, then assembled like enormous building blocks. They employed assembly line techniques never before used in shipbuilding, applying lessons from automotive manufacturing to maritime construction. They built dedicated Liberty shipyards rather than adapting traditional shipyards, optimizing every aspect of the process for speed. They trained tens of thousands of new workers, including large numbers of women, in specialized welding and fabrication techniques. The results were staggering. At peak production, American yards were completing 3 Liberty ships per day. In 1943 alone, the United States launched 19.2 million tons of merchant shipping, while U-boats sank 2.6 million tons. America was building ships more than 7 times faster than Germany could sink them. Individual Liberty ships could be sunk, individual convoys could be attacked, but the overall mathematics were devastating for German strategy. Even if U-boats achieved unprecedented success rates, even if every U-boat patrol resulted in multiple sinkings, American production would still exceed losses by enormous margins. The Battle of the Atlantic was being lost not through any failure of U-boat tactics or crew courage, but through simple arithmetic. Germany could not sink ships fast enough to prevent the American industrial avalanche from reaching Europe. 2 specific Liberty ships illustrated American production capability with crystalline clarity. The SS Robert E. Peary was built in 4 days and 15.5 hours in November 1942, from keel laying to launch. The SS Joseph N. Thiel was built in 10 days in September 1942. German naval intelligence officers reviewing these reports initially assumed they were propaganda fabrications, but multiple sources confirmed the vessels existed and the construction times were accurate. The Maritime Commission itself acknowledged these were special incentive ships built as publicity stunts, with extensive prefabrication done before keel laying and significant fitting-out work after launch. These extreme records were not repeated because they proved inefficient for routine production. But even acknowledging these caveats, the fact that American shipyards could build ocean-going cargo vessels in days rather than months demonstrated a level of industrial capacity that Germany could not match. These revelations accumulated throughout 1943 like hammer blows against German strategic planning. Each new piece of intelligence confirmed and amplified the picture of overwhelming American industrial superiority. Colonel Gehlen, whose responsibilities focused on the Eastern Front, began analyzing American industrial infrastructure through available sources: technical publications, pre-war industrial surveys, open-source information from American newspapers and trade journals. What he found explained how such production was possible, but made the strategic situation even more hopeless for Germany. The fundamental asymmetry was overwhelming. The United States possessed approximately 41% of the world's total industrial capacity, according to pre-war assessments. Germany, even after conquering most of Europe and exploiting the industrial capacity of France, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and other occupied territories, controlled perhaps 12% of global industrial capacity. But crude capacity percentages told only part of the story. American industry was characterized by scale and efficiency that German industry could not match even when operating at theoretical maximum output. The reasons were structural and systemic, not merely matters of effort or organization. A captured American technical manual for tank production proved particularly enlightening for German analysts trying to understand how American production achieved such scale. The manual, intended for factory foremen and production supervisors, described production processes at the Chrysler Tank Arsenal in Detroit. The facility employed 10,000 workers producing M4 Sherman medium tanks on assembly lines based directly on automotive manufacturing principles. Peak monthly production at this single facility reached 896 tanks in December 1942, with sustained monthly production in the 600 to 800 range. By comparison, the entire German tank industry in early 1943 spread across multiple facilities using skilled craftsmen and traditional manufacturing methods, produced approximately 600 tanks per month total. One American factory equaled the output of Germany's entire national tank production, and this was just one of multiple American tank production facilities. The manual revealed production methods that German industry had never implemented at such scale. Tanks moved down assembly lines just like automobiles. Sub-assemblies were produced in parallel, hulls in one area, turrets in another, engines and transmissions in separate sections, then brought together for final assembly. Workers specialized in specific tasks rather than having craftsmen build entire components. Specialized jigs and fixtures ensured components fit together properly without requiring skilled fitting. Interchangeable parts meant that components could be mass-produced and assembled without individual customization. Quality control used statistical sampling rather than individual inspection. The entire process was optimized for volume production at the expense of flexibility, customization, or craftsmanship. German tank production, by contrast, retained many characteristics of artisanal manufacturing. Skilled workers fitted components together, making adjustments to ensure proper fit. Tolerances were tighter, finish quality higher, individual craftsmanship more evident. German tanks were in many ways superior products: better armour, more powerful guns, more sophisticated engineering. The Panther and Tiger tanks were formidable weapons that Allied tankers feared with good reason, but Germany produced approximately one Panther for every 15 Shermans America built. The mathematical reality made quality differences strategically irrelevant. A single Tiger tank might destroy 5 Shermans in combat, but if the Americans could send 15 Shermans, the Tiger would still be overwhelmed. The Germans discovered that America had multiple tank production programs running simultaneously at different facilities, operated by companies with different specializations. The M4 Sherman alone was produced at 11 different facilities, operated by automotive companies like Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, and agricultural equipment manufacturers like Allis-Chalmers, and locomotive builders like Baldwin and Lima. These companies had no previous tank building experience, but applied their existing manufacturing expertise, mass production techniques from automotive plants, heavy machinery fabrication from agricultural equipment makers, large-scale welding and metalworking from locomotive builders, to military manufacturing with devastating effectiveness. This distributed production model provided resilience that German centralized production could not match. If one Sherman production facility was bombed or experienced problems, 10 others continued production. Total production barely fluctuated. Germany, with more centralized production, was more vulnerable to disruption. A single successful bombing raid on a critical facility could significantly impact national production. The decentralized American model was not just more productive, but also more resilient, harder to disrupt, and capable of rapid expansion by bringing additional facilities online. Artillery production followed similar patterns of overwhelming American superiority. Germany produced approximately 11,000 artillery pieces of all types in 1943. Howitzers, field guns, anti-tank guns, anti-aircraft guns, representing the maximum output German industry could sustain. This figure included production from German factories and occupied territories, every facility that could be mobilized for artillery production. America produced approximately 43,000 artillery pieces in the same year, nearly 4 times German output, while simultaneously supplying Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allies with thousands more pieces through Lend-Lease programs. German forces in combat noted that American artillery support was overwhelming, not because of any technical superiority. German artillery pieces were often superior in design, but simply due to volume. American artillery units fired support missions that consumed more ammunition in hours than German units received in weeks. This was not tactical excellence or better fire control. It was industrial capacity translated directly to battlefield firepower. Truck production represented perhaps the starkest and most operationally significant comparison between American and German industrial capacity. Modern military operations require transportation. Armies move on wheels and rails. Supplies must be transported from ports or railheads to fighting units. Wounded must be evacuated. Troops must be moved to threatened sectors. Artillery must be positioned and repositioned. In short, military effectiveness in modern warfare depends fundamentally on logistics mobility, and logistics mobility depends on motor vehicles. The Wehrmacht remained partially horse-drawn throughout the entire war, with hundreds of thousands of horses providing transportation for artillery, supplies, and equipment. This was not a romantic attachment to traditional methods or cultural preference for horses. It was simple lack of sufficient motor vehicles. Germany produced approximately 100,000 trucks in 1943, a figure that had to serve both military and essential civilian needs. The Wehrmacht never achieved complete motorization. Infantry divisions typically had their artillery and heavy equipment horse-drawn. Supply columns relied heavily on horse-drawn wagons. Only elite formations like panzer divisions were fully motorized, and even these often experienced vehicle shortages. America produced approximately 620,000 trucks in 1943, almost all for military use. American Lend-Lease programs delivered 427,284 trucks to the Soviet Union alone during the entire war, more than Germany's total truck production for all purposes during the entire conflict. Every American infantry division had more organic transport capacity than a German panzer division. American supply units operated vehicle fleets larger than those available to entire German armies. This disparity in logistics capability had direct and measurable battlefield consequences that German commanders observed with increasing alarm. American forces could concentrate supplies for offensive operations at speeds German forces could not match. When American units advanced, they maintained supply lines through massive motor transport efforts that delivered fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts continuously. The Red Ball Express, established after the Normandy invasion to supply advancing Allied armies, illustrated American logistics capacity at scale. The operation deployed 5,958 vehicles at peak, running in continuous convoys on dedicated one-way roads. Record single-day tonnage reached 12,342 tons on August 29, 1944, with sustained averages of 12,500 tons daily during peak periods. This single-supply convoy operation moved more tonnage per day than the entire German army in Western Europe received through all sources. German commanders observing this logistical operation through intelligence reports understood they were witnessing something unprecedented in military history. The Red Ball Express was not even America's primary supply system. It was an emergency measure implemented when rapid advances outran conventional supply methods. Yet this emergency backup system exceeded German logistics capacity. When German forces attempted similar supply convoys, they faced fuel shortages, vehicle breakdowns, Allied air attacks, and organizational problems. American convoys operated continuously despite all these same challenges, simply overwhelming problems through sheer scale. If one truck broke down, another took its place. If one convoy was attacked, another followed. The material superiority was so overwhelming that operational challenges became mere inconveniences rather than insurmountable obstacles. The captured documents also revealed American petroleum industry capacity, and this proved particularly devastating to German strategic calculations. Germany had faced chronic fuel shortages since the start of the war. The nation lacked significant domestic oil production, depending instead on synthetic fuel production from coal through the Fischer-Tropsch process and imported oil from Romanian fields. The synthetic fuel program represented a massive industrial effort, consuming enormous resources and electrical power to produce gasoline and diesel from coal. Romanian imports required maintaining control of the Balkans and protecting supply lines. German military operations were perpetually constrained by fuel availability. Strategic decisions about when and where to attack often depended more on fuel stocks than tactical opportunities. The 1942 German offensive toward the Caucasus was motivated primarily by the need to capture Soviet oil fields, not territorial ambitions or strategic positioning. American forces, by contrast, operated without any fuel constraints whatsoever. Captured supply documents showed American units in Italy receiving fuel allocations that exceeded their maximum possible consumption rates. They literally had more fuel than they could use. Some vehicles were operated for training, maintenance, or transport of minor supplies that German forces would have moved by hand or left unmoved. The source of this abundance became clear through intelligence analysis. American petroleum production in 1943 reached approximately 1.4 billion barrels, representing roughly two-thirds of total world production. The United States produced more oil than all other nations combined. Germany, with synthetic production and Romanian imports, produced perhaps 40 to 50 million barrels annually, less than 4% of American output. American forward logistics included fuel depots and tanker trucks in quantities that exceeded Germany's total national fuel stocks. Some captured documents referenced fuel being used for heating buildings, running electrical generators for non-essential purposes, and fueling vehicles for recreational trips. The waste of fuel for purposes German forces would consider criminally negligent was routine in American operations. During the Battle of the Bulge, German planning explicitly depended on capturing American fuel depots because the Wehrmacht could not supply sufficient fuel for the offensive through its own logistics. This dependency on capturing enemy supplies was itself an admission of German logistical weakness and strategic desperation. Steel production statistics underlined every other production comparison because steel is the foundation of industrial warfare. Weapons, vehicles, ships, infrastructure, tools, all require steel. Military production in an industrial war is fundamentally constrained by steel availability. Germany produced approximately 30 million tons of steel in 1943, representing maximum output from German industrial capacity plus captured European steel production. This figure included output from occupied French, Belgian and Czech steel mills, operating under German direction. It represented total mobilization of every available steel-producing facility. The United States produced 81 million tons of steel in 1943. America produced nearly 3 tons of steel for every 1 ton Germany produced. The Soviet Union, despite massive industrial evacuation and German destruction of Western industrial areas, still produced approximately 18 million tons. Combined Allied steel production approached 150 million tons versus German output of 30 million tons, a 5-to-1 advantage that translated directly to weapons production. More steel meant more tanks, more ships, more artillery, more trucks, more aircraft, more ammunition, more of everything required for industrial warfare. The steel production gap was not something that could be overcome through better tactics, superior training, or ideological commitment. It was a fundamental resource constraint that determined maximum possible military production. Germany was fighting a 5-front war: Western Europe, Eastern Front, Italy, air war over Germany, Atlantic Ocean, with 1/5 the steel production of its combined enemies. The mathematics of defeat were written in steel production figures. Colonel Gehlen and Colonel von Roener spent weeks during late 1943 analysing these figures with increasing desperation, cross-referencing sources, searching for errors or exaggerations that might make the picture less catastrophic. They found none. Every source confirmed the same basic reality. They brought in other analysts from both Foreign Armies East and Foreign Armies West, showed them the data, asked for independent assessments. The conclusions were always the same. America possessed industrial capacity that made German production look like cottage industry. The Soviet Union, despite massive losses and German occupation of significant industrial territory, had successfully evacuated and rebuilt industrial capacity that exceeded German output. Britain, though smaller in absolute terms, maintained production sufficient to supply a modern army, while also providing advanced technologies like radar, jet engines and code-breaking machinery that Germany struggled to match. Germany faced 3 major opponents, each of which had greater industrial capacity than Germany in at least some categories. Combined Allied production advantage was overwhelming across every category of military equipment. The only question was how long German tactical superiority and defensive advantages could delay inevitable defeat. The analysts prepared a comprehensive report for the German High Command in December 1943. The report was clinical, mathematical, undeniable in its logic. It compared German production capacity to Allied output across every significant category of military equipment: tanks, artillery, aircraft, trucks, ships, ammunition, fuel, steel. Every comparison told the same story. Germany was outproduced in every category by significant margins, and the gap was widening rather than narrowing as the war continued. But the report went beyond simply presenting production numbers. The analysts included detailed projections of what these production figures meant for military operations over the next 12 to 24 months. They calculated that Allied production advantages meant Germany would face increasing numerical superiority in every theatre. German forces could continue winning individual battles through superior tactics, better training, and sometimes better equipment. But they would inevitably lose campaigns through attrition. Every tank destroyed, every aircraft shot down, every truck knocked out would be replaced for the Allies within weeks or months. German losses took much longer to replace, if they were replaced at all. The mathematics of attrition warfare inexorably favoured the side with industrial capacity to sustain losses indefinitely, and that side was not Germany. The report included projections for 1944 and beyond. If current production trends continued, by mid-1944, Allied forces would achieve numerical superiority ratios of 3-1 or greater in most combat categories. By 1945, ratios would likely reach 5-1 or higher in many categories. German forces, no matter how well trained or tactically proficient, could not sustain combat against such numerical odds indefinitely. Quality advantages in individual weapon systems became irrelevant when facing 5 times as many enemy weapons. Even if German forces maintained their tactical superiority, even if they won every engagement, the cumulative losses would eventually destroy the Wehrmacht through simple attrition. Available manpower was finite. Industrial capacity was constrained. Territory was being lost rather than gained, reducing access to resources. The trajectory pointed inexorably toward defeat. The report concluded with mathematical certainty that Germany could not win the war through military means given current industrial balance. This was not defeatism or political opinion. It was objective analysis based on verified data. The conclusion was professional assessment that should have informed strategic decision-making. The analysts expected the High Command to use this information to develop realistic strategic options. Perhaps Germany could seek diplomatic solutions while still holding significant territory and maintaining some bargaining position. Perhaps resources could be reallocated to focus on defensive operations that might extend the war while seeking political settlement. Perhaps the information could inform decisions about which territories to prioritize holding and which to yield. At minimum, realistic understanding of the situation might prevent wasteful offensive operations that consumed irreplaceable resources without achieving strategic objectives. Colonel von Roehner presented this report to his superiors in the High Command with full knowledge of its controversial implications. He was not a defeatist. His professional record demonstrated commitment to German victory. He was not a traitor. His Prussian military heritage and personal honour were beyond question. He was a professional intelligence officer presenting accurate analysis so that leadership could make informed decisions. He expected disagreement, perhaps anger at the unwelcome conclusions. What he encountered was something worse: complete rejection of the analysis itself. Hitler refused to accept the report's conclusions, calling them defeatist propaganda, undermining German morale. He argued that German willpower, superior tactics, and impending technological advances would overcome numerical disadvantages. He cited historical examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through skill and determination: Frederick the Great's victories when outnumbered, Hannibal's victories over Rome, Napoleon's early campaigns. He insisted that Allied production figures were exaggerated for propaganda purposes, that American equipment was inferior and would fail in combat, that Soviet industry would collapse under continued German pressure, that Britain was near economic exhaustion. Other commanders and Nazi leadership figures reacted similarly. They pointed to continuing German tactical victories, to superior German weapons like the Panther tank and the Me-262 jet fighter, to the defensive advantages of fortified positions. They argued that German troops were better trained, better led, more ideologically motivated than Allied forces. They believed that tactical excellence could overcome numerical disadvantage. Some argued that secret weapons under development, jet aircraft, improved U-boats, V-weapons, would change the strategic balance. Von Roehner attempted to explain that tactics became irrelevant against overwhelming material superiority, that quality differences disappeared when facing 5 times as many enemies, that even the best troops could not fight effectively without fuel, ammunition, and replacement equipment. His arguments were dismissed as defeatism. The report was filed and ignored. The German High Command's rejection of these intelligence assessments represented a fundamental failure to understand how modern industrial warfare worked. Military traditions from previous centuries emphasized courage, skill, leadership, tactical brilliance as the decisive factors in warfare. These qualities had won wars for thousands of years. Individual warriors with superior training could defeat larger numbers of inferior opponents. Superior tactics could overcome numerical disadvantages. Brilliant commanders could achieve victory through maneuver and deception. But World War II was different from all previous conflicts. It was the first truly industrial total war where victory depended more on factory output than battlefield prowess. The nation that could produce more tanks, planes, guns, ammunition and supplies would win through simple attrition, regardless of tactical considerations. Germany's military leadership, trained in traditional Prussian military methods, could not psychologically accept this new reality. But some German officers did understand. General Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's greatest tank commanders and theorists of armoured warfare, wrote in his memoirs about studying captured American equipment and supply documents. He concluded that Germany was fighting an enemy with unlimited industrial resources and that victory was impossible under these circumstances. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel reached similar conclusions after fighting British and American forces in North Africa, Italy, and France. He noted in letters to his wife and in official reports that German tactical superiority meant nothing against enemies who could replace losses immediately, while German units fought with steadily dwindling resources. In 1944, he would be driven to participation in the plot against Hitler, partly from this recognition that the war could not be won militarily. Albert Speer, appointed Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production in February 1942, understood the production gap and worked frantically to increase German output. He achieved significant increases through rationalization of production, better resource allocation, and ruthless exploitation of slave labor. German production increased substantially under his direction. 1943 and 1944 saw peak German output in most categories. But Speer knew his efforts were insufficient. After Allied bombing of synthetic oil facilities began in May 1944, Speer concluded the war was economically lost. The May 12, 1944 bombing of the Leuna synthetic oil plant was, in Speer's later words, the day the technological war was decided. He would later state, "On that day, it was clear to everyone in German industry that they had lost the war." Yet he continued demanding production increases, making speeches about secret weapons and ultimate victory, because his worldview and position left no alternative. The intelligence analysts continued their work throughout 1944, even as their reports were systematically dismissed or ignored. They documented the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, with the same mathematical precision they had applied to production statistics. The landing involved approximately 5,000 ships carrying 156,000 troops in the first day, followed by millions more in subsequent months. The logistical planning and execution involved in such an operation exceeded anything Germany had attempted, even at the peak of its power. The artificial Mulberry harbours deployed to support the invasion, temporary harbours built in Britain, towed across the English Channel, and assembled off the Normandy coast, represented engineering and industrial capacity that German forces could not match. Each Mulberry harbour was roughly the size of Dover Harbour, Britain's major port, but built specifically for this invasion and considered expendable. Within weeks of the landing, Allied forces were receiving supplies through these artificial harbours at rates that would have sustained the entire Wehrmacht. Supply depots established in Normandy contained more material than existed in all of Germany. Photographic reconnaissance showed fuel dumps, ammunition stockpiles, vehicle parks, supply warehouses covering square miles. Allied logistics operated at scales that made German supply operations look primitive. American combat units consumed supplies at rates German forces could not imagine sustaining. Artillery-fired support missions measured in thousands of rounds per day. Infantry units were resupplied daily with fresh food, ammunition, replacement equipment. Vehicle maintenance was supported by mobile repair facilities, carrying enormous inventories of spare parts. Medical care included frontline surgical hospitals equipped with supplies and equipment better than most civilian hospitals in Germany. The intelligence services documented American air operations in Europe with similar precision. By late 1944, American and British air forces were flying thousands of sorties daily, dropping thousands of tons of bombs, losing hundreds of aircraft to flak and fighters, and replacing those losses immediately. The 8th Air Force operating from Britain alone had more aircraft than the entire Luftwaffe. A single American bomb group, roughly equivalent to a German Geschwader, had more aircraft than some German Fliegerkorps. German aircraft production, despite Speer's desperate efforts, peaked at approximately 39,807 aircraft in 1944 before declining sharply under the combined effects of Allied bombing, fuel shortages, and resource constraints. American production in 1944 reached 96,318 aircraft. The Americans were building more than 2 aircraft for every 1 Germany produced, and American aircraft were increasingly sophisticated. Long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang, heavy bombers like the B-17 and B-24, and specialized aircraft for every role. The sky belonged to the Allies by 1944 because American factories could build planes faster than German pilots, and flak guns could shoot them down. The Luftwaffe was dying through attrition, losing experienced pilots who could not be replaced, burning fuel that could not be replenished, flying aircraft that were outnumbered by factors of 5 to 1 or higher. German jet aircraft like the Me-262 represented technological superiority, but Germany produced only about 1,400 Me-262s total. They were outnumbered by thousands of Allied conventional fighters and could not change the strategic balance. Quality became irrelevant against overwhelming quantity. The final devastating intelligence came in late 1944 through detailed analysis of Allied logistics operations in France. After the Normandy breakout in late July and August, American forces advanced rapidly across France, liberating Paris, pushing toward the German border. For a brief period in late August and early September, American forces outran their supply lines. Supply trucks were traveling hundreds of miles from Normandy beaches to advancing units, consuming enormous amounts of fuel just for the journey. This should have created opportunities for German counterattacks against overextended Allied forces with vulnerable supply lines. Instead, the Americans simply flew supplies forward. The intelligence reports documented that American forces were receiving supplies by air in quantities that exceeded what German ground forces could transport by truck and rail combined. Thousands of C-47 transport aircraft flying multiple missions daily delivered fuel, ammunition, and food to advancing armies. During the period when ground supply was constrained, American transport aircraft delivered thousands of tons of supplies daily. This air supply capability alone exceeded Germany's entire logistics capacity. The analysis was devastating. America had so much transport capacity that they used aircraft, expensive, complex, resource-intensive aircraft, to deliver routine supplies simply because it was faster than ground transport. Germany could barely supply frontline units by truck and train. America was using aircraft for routine logistics. One particular example, documented by intelligence analysts, illustrated the disparity with painful clarity. General George Patton's Third Army advanced so rapidly in August 1944 that ground supply lines could not keep pace. The army temporarily halted due to fuel shortages in early September, demonstrating that even American logistics had physical limits. But the halt lasted only days. Emergency air supply operations delivered sufficient fuel to resume the advance within 72 hours. German intelligence calculated that the tonnage flown to Third Army in 1 week exceeded what the entire Luftwaffe could have transported in a month, even at full strength with unlimited fuel. And the Luftwaffe in September 1944 had neither full strength nor unlimited fuel. It had a fraction of its former capacity, operating with fuel rationing, losing aircraft faster than they could be replaced. By late 1944, the intelligence services were documenting not just American superiority, but the immediate implications of that superiority for Germany's survival. Soviet forces were advancing from the east with massive numerical advantages in tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Soviet industrial production had recovered from initial German advances and was being supplemented by enormous American Lend-Lease shipments: 400,000 trucks, 12,000 armoured vehicles, 11,000 aircraft, enormous quantities of food, fuel, raw materials. British and American forces advanced from the west with complete air superiority and overwhelming logistic support. German forces still fought skillfully, still conducted tactical masterpieces, still extracted heavy casualties from attacking forces. But the strategic outcome was never in doubt. The numbers made defeat inevitable. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944, Germany's last major attack in the West, demonstrated the futility of fighting against such industrial superiority. German forces achieved complete surprise through careful security and radio silence. They achieved initial tactical success, driving through American lines, capturing territory, causing panic in Allied rear areas. The offensive advanced significantly in the first days, seeming to validate Hitler's faith in willpower and tactical skill. But the offensive was doomed before it began, not by any failure of planning or execution, but by simple logistics mathematics. German plans explicitly depended on capturing American fuel depots to sustain the attack. The Wehrmacht could not supply sufficient fuel through its own logistics system for an offensive of this scale and duration. Hitler himself stated that German forces would have to rely on capturing Allied dumps during their push westward. Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead armoured formation, specifically targeted American fuel depots, coming within 1,000 feet of a major storage facility at Stavelot before American forces set it ablaze. This dependency on capturing enemy supplies was itself admission of German logistical weakness and strategic desperation. No successful military operation should depend on seizing enemy resources to continue. That the German High Command approved such a plan demonstrated how divorced from reality their strategic thinking had become. When American forces recovered from initial surprise and brought their material superiority to bear, the German offensive collapsed within weeks. American units that suffered heavy initial losses were reinforced and resupplied within days. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at Bastogne, was sustained by air supply while American armoured forces fought through to relieve them. German forces that initially advanced rapidly found themselves immobilized by fuel shortages under constant air attack when weather cleared, facing enemy reinforcements arriving faster than German commanders thought possible. The offensive consumed Germany's last operational reserves of fuel, armour, and experienced troops for no strategic gain whatsoever. Intelligence analysis of the Ardennes operation confirmed earlier assessments with brutal clarity. American forces lost heavily in the initial fighting, approximately 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, 23,000 captured or missing. But these losses were replaced within weeks. Within a month, American forces were stronger than before the offensive began. German losses were proportionally smaller, approximately 12,000 killed, 38,000 wounded, 30,000 captured or missing, but irreplaceable. Germany had no strategic reserves. The experienced troops lost in the Ardennes could not be replaced. The panzers destroyed could not be rebuilt. The fuel consumed was gone. The battle demonstrated in microcosm what intelligence analysts had been documenting for years. German tactical skill and initial success meant nothing against enemies who could absorb losses and continue fighting with undiminished strength, while German strength declined inexorably. Colonel Alexis von Roener did not live to see Germany's final defeat. He was arrested in July 1944 for peripheral connections to the July 20th plot against Hitler. Though his involvement was minor, he knew of the conspiracy but did not actively participate, the Nazi regime executed him on October 12, 1944 at Plötzensee prison. His death removed one of Germany's most accurate intelligence analysts, a man who had tried repeatedly to provide objective assessment of enemy capabilities to inform strategic decisions. Historians would later discover that von Roener had been secretly anti-Nazi for years and had deliberately passed deceptive Allied intelligence about D-Day preparations to Hitler, making him an unwitting Allied asset while ostensibly serving German intelligence. His execution was both personally tragic and professionally symbolic. Nazi Germany literally killed the messenger for bringing unwelcome truths. Colonel Gehlen survived the war. In the final months, he organized the preservation of foreign armies' East files, microfilming documents and hiding them in the Bavarian Alps. After German surrender, he contacted American forces and offered his intelligence files and expertise. The Americans, recognizing the value of his knowledge about Soviet forces as the Cold War began, employed him. He would later lead West German intelligence services, his analytical capabilities recognized even by former enemies. The Foreign Army's East files he preserved became valuable intelligence assets for the Western Allies. The story of German intelligence analysis during World War II reveals profound truths about modern warfare that remain relevant decades later. Industrial capacity determines victory in total war between modern industrial nations. Courage, skill, tactical brilliance, ideological fervour. All these matter, but they cannot overcome overwhelming material disadvantage. The Germans discovered this truth through careful analysis of captured American supply documents, systematic production statistics, and rigorous mathematical calculation. They presented this truth to their leadership repeatedly throughout 1943 and 1944. Their warnings were ignored because accepting them meant accepting inevitable defeat. The captured American supply charts and logistics documents that so shocked German analysts in late 1943 were not secret weapons or classified technologies. They were mundane bureaucratic paperwork, routine accounting of supplies received and consumed, standard military logistics documentation. Their power lay not in revealing secrets, but in demonstrating reality. America could produce, transport, and consume military supplies at scales Germany could not match. This simple truth, confirmed through careful intelligence analysis, determined the war's outcome more surely than any battle. Logistics is the unglamorous but essential foundation of military power. An army without fuel cannot move. An army without ammunition cannot fight. An army without food cannot survive. Superior tactics mean nothing when soldiers lack the material means to execute them. The mathematical impossibility of German victory was clear to professional intelligence analysts by late 1943. Every subsequent month confirmed and amplified this conclusion with additional data. American production increased while German production stagnated or declined under Allied bombing. Soviet production recovered and expanded beyond German capacity. British production, though smaller in absolute terms, contributed crucial technologies and significant material. The combined Allied production advantage grew from 3-1 in 1943 to 5-1 or greater by 1945. The human cost of ignoring these intelligence assessments was staggering and tragic. Germany fought for approximately 18 months after intelligence services concluded victory was impossible. Millions died in fighting that professional analysts knew could not change the ultimate outcome. Cities were destroyed, populations decimated, Europe devastated, Jewish communities annihilated, all while intelligence reports sat in files documenting the mathematical certainty of defeat. The tragedy was not just that Germany lost. The tragedy was that the loss was predictable, documented, and presented to leadership who refused to accept mathematical reality. The German intelligence analysts who studied American supply capabilities and production statistics performed their professional duties with competence and integrity. They gathered information from multiple independent sources. They analysed data carefully and systematically. They presented conclusions based on evidence rather than ideology or wishful thinking. Their work represented what intelligence services should do: provide accurate assessments to enable informed decision-making. That their conclusions were systematically ignored and rejected represents failure not of intelligence, but of leadership unwilling to accept unpleasant truths. The mathematical proof of German defeat existed in captured supply manifests showing American corps receiving more material than German armies. It existed in production statistics showing American factories building more weapons in months than Germany produced in years. It existed in shipping data showing America launching vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. It existed in petroleum figures showing American fuel abundance while German forces rationed every drop. It existed in steel production comparisons showing Allied output exceeding German capacity by 5-1. It existed in truck production showing American logistics capacity that made German operations look primitive. The proof was comprehensive, verified from multiple sources, mathematically undeniable, and systematically ignored by those with power to act on it. Looking back from the perspective of 8 decades, the German intelligence assessments of 1943 and 1944 appear both prescient and tragically futile. The analysts were correct in every major conclusion. Victory was impossible given the industrial balance. The mathematics of attrition made defeat inevitable. No amount of tactical skill could overcome such fundamental material disadvantage. But this knowledge changed nothing because leadership chose to believe in willpower, ideology, and historical destiny rather than arithmetic. The war continued until Germany's complete military collapse, until cities were ruins, until millions more were dead, until the Third Reich was utterly destroyed, until the evidence of defeat was written not in captured documents, but in occupied territory and unconditional surrender. The lesson from this historical episode transcends World War II and remains relevant for understanding conflict between modern industrial nations. Accurate intelligence is worthless if leadership refuses to accept unwelcome conclusions. Systematic analysis means nothing if decisions are based on ideology rather than evidence. Professional competence becomes irrelevant when confronted with willful blindness. German intelligence provided accurate assessment of enemy capabilities and probable outcomes. German leadership chose fantasy over reality, and the result was catastrophe that might have been limited or mitigated through earlier acceptance of mathematical truth. Wars between industrial powers are fundamentally economic contests, won in factories before outcomes are decided on battlefields. This principle was proven definitively in World War II. Germany's intelligence analysts understood this by 1943. They documented it meticulously. They presented it clearly. They warned repeatedly that continued fighting would only increase the magnitude of ultimate defeat without changing the outcome. Their leadership never accepted this truth. The cost of that refusal was measured in millions of lives, destroyed cities, and Germany's total destruction as a nation-state in May 1945. The captured American supply charts and logistics documents represented evidence of a simple but decisive reality. America could produce more, transport more, and consume more military supplies than Germany. This advantage was not marginal. It was overwhelming, sufficient to make German defeat inevitable regardless of battlefield performance. 3-1 advantages in production can be overcome through superior tactics, better equipment, advantageous terrain. 5-1 advantages cannot be overcome except through enemy mistakes so massive as to be unlikely. The Allied advantage exceeded 5-1 in many categories and was growing larger over time. In the end, German analysts studied captured American supply charts and understood they could never win, not through any single revelation, but through accumulation of undeniable evidence over months. Each captured document added data points. Each production statistic confirmed patterns. Each prisoner interrogation provided validation. Each agent report corroborated previous intelligence. The picture that emerged was complete, verified, mathematically certain. Germany faced enemies with 3 to 5 times its industrial capacity, and that gap was widening. No amount of tactical skill or fighting spirit could overcome such fundamental disparity in a war of industrial attrition. The analysts knew this, documented it meticulously, and presented it clearly to leadership. Their tragedy was not analytical failure, but the irrelevance of accurate intelligence when leadership refuses to accept reality. The captured supply documents told a story of inevitable defeat written in numbers that could not be argued with or dismissed except through willful blindness. They showed American abundance that seemed impossible according to German experience, but was verified through multiple independent sources. They revealed an enemy with such overwhelming industrial capacity that German hopes of military victory were fantasies disconnected from material reality. The only question remaining by late 1943 was how long Germany would deny what the numbers made clear, how many more would die before arithmetic replaced ideology as the basis for strategic decisions. That question was answered on May 7, 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, defeated not primarily by military force, but by the mathematical certainty that industrial capacity determines victory in modern war. The intelligence analysts who first studied those captured supply documents in late 1943 had understood this truth 18 months earlier. They had tried to warn their leadership. They had presented the evidence. They had shown the mathematics. Their warnings were ignored, and millions paid the price for that willful blindness. The captured American supply charts documented not just military logistics, but the futility of fighting against overwhelming industrial superiority. The numbers told a truth that German leadership could not accept. In modern industrial warfare, factories matter more than courage, production lines determine outcomes more than tactics, and arithmetic always wins in the end.